coming off mute, really useful. Hello and welcome to another live stream. I was just watching everybody in chat go through, and there's a little poll up if you're just joining us. Don't forget to sign up and say on the poll whether you prefer brush painting, airbrushing or spray cans, because it's kind of relevant to what we're talking about this evening. So this week's live stream, I'm going to start by sharing. Today I reached a really important achievement. Not only did I get past like hundreds and hundreds of hours on like nearly 300 hours on Starfield, I also managed to get to level 100. So I have devoted over 11 days of my life to playing a computer game. I sometimes wish they didn't keep score. Anyway, that was my fun for the day. I also lost at Star Wars Legion. So, right, back to chat. Welcome to everybody who's here. I've seen quite a few people, so hello to you already. And I can see people already talking about why they prefer brush painting and airbrushing and spray cans. So I think it's going to be a really interesting live stream. And I'm really excited to talk about it because, quite frankly, I've struggled with all of them over the years. And, you know, I think there's going to be some really great tips I've learned over the years I can share with you, and also maybe a lot we can share between each other. So feel free, please, to put your comments in chat so people can read them. They can always read them afterwards when they come back and look at the video if it's not there. So just, you know, if you've got any great tips, do pop them in there. Welcome to everybody I've said hello to already in chat, and to all the people who never like to pop up their heads there. I do appreciate you all being here. And before I get going properly, I must thank my moderators. So there's definitely Timber and Norm that I've seen, and Digger probably popping in later. Thank you guys. They keep those dodgy chatbots at bay. And if you say something rude about my hair, they'll probably delete that too for you. Hey. Right, so moving on. Poll's got 38 votes. And YouTube wants me to put some adverts in. And airbrushing is winning, which, considering tonight's topic is airbrushing, probably a good thing. Andy's been to the Farnborough Home Building and Renovation Show, so he might be getting the real paintbrushes out soon. And welcome to everybody else. We've got Stephen from Scotland arriving. Wheezy Palace. Jaw21. Yeah, my real name, right? Sure. RGJ Trains. Gosh, I hate my varifocals. This distance is just out of focus. So I've put the screen really big and then I just try and read it while it's still slightly blurry. Hi Tom, and to everybody else that turns up. So thank you. I'll keep the poll up for a while because I think it's interesting. What's interesting is when it first went up, it was like 100% brush painting practically, and airbrushing has taken over, which does fascinate me as to which people prefer, because quite a few people, I spotted Tamsin and a couple of others saying it, say it depends what I'm painting. And for me, airbrush is definitely a tool. A brush is a tool and a spray can is a tool. So it is about what I need to do, where I need to do it, and just what kind of mood I'm in, because I really do find some a little bit harder than others. So yeah, there we go. So we've got our first tip from chat, and that's from Timber. Don't buy cheap Chinese airbrushes. They don't last as they clog up after a few goes. Buy medium or top brands. So that is a very good tip. I started with Badger and quickly moved on to my Iwata HPCS Eclipse, which I've had for donkey's years, like probably, I don't know, not 20, but 10, 15 years. I have two of them identical, so if one breaks, I can use the other, because airbrushing is kind of a time-critical thing for me sometimes. And I love my Iwata. There are other brands out there that will be just as good, but that just happens to be the one I have. And what blew my mind was Pele Sobo came and did a talk at NMRA British Region convention that I went to, and he did it on airbrushing and weathering and things. And I've picked up so many tips off him. He's a great railway modeller if you don't know him. And I've been to his house and seen his layout when he lived there. We actually went over to Copenhagen just to go and visit Trollskirk and him. It was great. Both brilliant artists. And what he did was kind of this was really almost before YouTube, so it was before you could watch other people do stuff. He had one with a top cup, Whereas before I'd always been using the bottles on the bottom, which you have to put a lot in and they run out really quickly. He used a top cup and he actually mixed the paint, blending the colours in there. And I was like, wow, mind blown. I only have to mix a little if I put it in a top little cup feeder, and I can actually mix the colours up while I'm in there and change them slightly as I'm spraying. That was really exciting. Let's just see a few more people coming in. Right, we've got Pat. Hi, Pat. Kansas Wildcat. Hello from a -11 Fahrenheit. It's a good thing you put Fahrenheit because that is a lot colder than -11 centigrade. Kansas City. Sounds cold. Wrap up warm. And then we've got MP Model Plastic. Greetings from Portugal. Probably a bit warmer in Portugal. RGJ thinks everyone will be desperate for him to get going. Well, I think Tim will be desperate to get going with his. I presume his airbrush. And Norm's from California, so it's probably warm over there. Michelle Johnson, hello to all. New to airbrushing, need all the help I can get. Looking forward to this chat. Brilliant. I have a lot of tips. I hated airbrushing for almost like the first 10 years I did it. So I do have a really love-hate relationship with it. I love what I can do with it. I hate doing it sometimes. But there we go. Amaze Tay says he's still using the cheap 30 quid Chinese one from Amazon. Better than my Iwata one. It's still going strong. Maybe there's different brands of Chinese ones. So I don't know. So Tamsin says she has two Iwata Revolution airbrushes, 0.5 and 0.3. I tried to get, for the Iwata Eclipse, different nozzle sizes. They don't. They literally just have one, and it's a very fine airbrush. So that would be my only criticism of it, and that's why spray cans are on the list, which 8% of people now prefer, which we could work out how many that is out of 53 votes, but it's a fair enough percentage. That actually, it doesn't put out a huge amount of paint necessarily. Secret Anagram. Secret Anorak thinks that he uses both cheap and cheerful airbrushes and £200 airbrushes, and it all depends what you're painting. So there we go. Stephen from Scotland. Painting is a weak area for me. I usually end up with more paint on me than whatever I'm trying to paint. My other pair of jeans that I've been wearing, they have bright red spatters on them from when I was trying to open a Vallejo sort of paint to put in. This is when I was sprayed with acrylics, and the top didn't come off, so I squeezed harder and the whole lot exploded. I got it off the floor and I got it off the walls and I got it off most of, there's still splatters around that I missed, but I didn't realise how much I got on my jeans, and by the time I got to them it had baked in and it won't come out. So I now have red paint all the way down my jeans. I wear them quite a lot for when I'm painting. Tamsin has cheap bottle feed one for certain jobs. If you want volume, as I just said, the little one doesn't spray that much. Jewel 21, I've always noticed whenever I want to spray paint, it's even chucking it down or gale force 10. That is probably a good time to talk about when you might use each of these. Now, 60% of people here say they prefer airbrushing. 30, well, and it keeps changing. Ooh, just gone down a bit. 35% prefer brush painting and 7% prefer spray cans. Now, I'm going to be honest. Given a choice, I'd rather sit down and paint something by hand. It's comfier. I can do it without an air mask on. I can do it sat somewhere comfy with music going, somewhere nice and warm. It's not outside, there's no gusty wind. I'm not doing it on top of the bins. I can paint details. I can get lost in painting. And I love brush painting for that reason. Given a choice, I would always brush paint. But I can't get the finish with brush painting. And I can't get into all the nooks and crannies easily. If I want to spray the terrain that I'm doing at the moment that's filling my kitchen, I literally would take weeks to paint all that by hand. By the time I've got 2 layers of spray putty, how you'd even do spray putty without a spray is quite beyond me, and then 2 layers of primer, it wouldn't be smooth, I'd have brush marks, it wouldn't look as good, and it would basically suck. So for that, I have to either use spray cans or airbrushing. And if you want metallics, personally, I think the best way to do metallics is spraying, but I do see people do some beautiful hand-painted metallics using some of the newer paints that have come out without the brush strokes, and they get it to look really good. But if you're going to do a whole big thing rather than a little mini or something, and you want it to be metallic, spray painting is going to give you, either spray cans or airbrushing, to be honest, is going to give you a much, much better finish than you'd get with a brush. So a lot of it really depends on what I am painting. Now, I'm not going to talk about brush painting this week particularly, mostly because I don't feel that good at it, and there are so many different styles in it. It becomes quite a bit about what you actually paint as to whether brush painting is more popular than airbrushing or not. If you're doing minis, I just don't have control of my airbrush to really do much with a mini, and that's lack of practice on my part, because I see people do amazing things with their airbrushes and minis, so I know that you can do it, I just know I can't do it. And a lot of the art with all of this is practice. So let's just go pick up chat for a second. Tamsin says she has a cheap bottle feed one, I've said that. Draw21, I've always noticed that, yep, chucking down. That's one reason why I prefer brush painting, it's more comfortable. But actually I just had to spray paint inside this week because much as I never, ever, ever spray cans inside for the amount of fumes they put into my house and actually the amount of just paint residue they dust everywhere, my airbrush is in quite a small utility room where I also have my cleaning up for wash and cure stations and stuff for doing 3D prints. So there's not a lot in there that can't get dusty. It's literally just that. I've got to say, I couldn't go outside. It was -degrees and I don't think spray painting outside is good. It's been raining for weeks and it's just so windy. And one of the things with spray painting, you're supposed to be 12 inches away of something. And I find when it's windy, I get closer and closer because not enough of it is hitting it and it blows away. So I thought this time I'm just going to basically spray paint inside. What it does mean is that the floor, my stone floor, because it's a stone floor in there, it's a utility part of my nice kitchen that was, it's still a nice kitchen, it's just not as tidy as perhaps it was. It's got paint spatters everywhere, including over cupboards. It's now got paint sort of residue on the floor. It's like the dust that gets there. But the whole edge of the worktop I noticed is grey. I was like, I should have probably, I've got a mat down that protects most of it, but there's like this much of a gap. I'm like, probably should have put masking tape or something over that. Okay. So yeah, there's definitely times when you want to do one over the other as well. So RGGA trays, now dry brushing, that's another ball game completely. I've not mastered either. So dry brushing, I think, is partly about the brush and partly about not having much on your brush. And interestingly, what I've noticed nowadays, people have these dry brushing like trays with bits in, like bits of leftover this, that and the other, and they glue them all in and then they use that to take it off, which is a fascinating way of painting, I think. You know, I've never thought to do that. Hi to Thorn from Germany, nice to have you with us. Paul Barton, whenever the airbrush, always use an extractor spray booth. Yes, and we'll be talking more about how you get into these things in a sec. That's a really good tip. Right, just gonna have to shut the poll a bit. Right, whenever that airbrush, always using extractor, it's Grace on tonight, Kathy. Rob goes nowhere near the airbrush. Sorry, Grace. Hard to tell, but yeah, I get that, and I think it's really good there's two of you, because then you can split what you like into each other as long as you're not the one ending up with the task you don't want. So Tim says experiences differ, but the general consensus of the airbrush cliques is don't buy cheap. I think that applies to most tools, but when you're starting, I'd advise you to start cheap till you decide whether you like it. So Graham definitely prefers airbrush. Norm says probably looked like a crime scene. That was my red trousers. He's talking about the red paint. It did actually. It's amazing how a small bottle this big can have so much paint in it. So Tamsin says that, Yay, my real name, right? Says I use a cheap bottom fed Chinese airbrush which I use for groundworks. I get that totally. The really expensive ones with the small tops just don't put out enough oomph. But personally, I use acrylic paint for my groundworks, so I don't generally spray paint them. Tamsin, airbrush versus spray can. She prefers airbrush to spray can. For me, as going outside to spray is awkward. I get that. My bins are a completely different colour. You've all probably seen me spraying on them. If you've seen one YouTube video from me in the last 2 years, you'll probably have seen me spraying on top of my bins outside. RGJ, so Grace says, I can't airbrush inside, there's no space for ventilation, it's too cold in the shed, but brush painting is also therapeutic. And I think that's why I prefer brush painting. It's just actually more simple and comfy. Stuart says, done the same, covered myself, my jeans and hoodie twice now in a Vallejo explosion. That is not just me. Red is the worst colour though. It does look like blood. So David says, the better quality airbrushes are essentially the same as the cheap Chinese versions. The difference is primarily in quality control. The Chinese cheapies are just built and thrown in a box. And that's probably the same for most things in life. So Bruce says, very, very, I think sensibly, I'd pick both airbrushing and a regular brush, depends on the job. And that's where we're going to come to next. Trevor's definitely an airbrush. Every time I scroll down, it goes like whoomp, all the way to the bottom. Trevor uses an airbrush for larger jobs, but brush for small stuff. I think it's a really good divide. Timber's new kid on the block, fourth option are paint pens. I actually use them quite a bit, certainly for panel lining, and I've used them for, I think I did an attack with loads of explosions and it was the Stinger, and I used them to paint that. It's really cool. I didn't actually paint the PLA, I just painted sections of it with the pens. They are quite cool. Gundam markers were the ones I used. Yep, and Secret Anorak uses 00 gauge people. I'm not brave enough to try with an airbrush for detail. I'm not sure I would ever do 00 gauge people with an airbrush, but I would certainly paint the primer for them. And Timber agrees, you need to be a top class artist to airbrush the detail on 00s, ends or minis. So a lot of people are saying airbrush for larger areas and brush for detail. So first of all, let's just talk a little bit about when you might use, we're going to talk about airbrushing and spray paints, when you would use either of those over brush paints. And size is definitely a thing. So I'm painting terrain at the moment. My big buildings are chunky, they're a tad too big. I wish I'd designed them a little bit smaller, but they're on a modular basis and it's an L and it just ended up massive. So I've got these really big things. And you've all seen pictures of me painting in the past. I wonder if it's on the movie. No, I don't think I put it on the movie. But me painting on the past, outside, on the grass, on the patio, on the bins, with, you know, rack after rack of cardboard with things on them. When you're painting that size, there's no way you can brush paint quickly. I tried doing something and I just went, and I did two, and I just went, this is taking forever, and I took them outside and spray canned them. I've tried airbrushing that size and you can do it, but you're forever filling up your spray paint, and it's more expensive paint in some ways, those little tins, than it is trying to just get a spray can. So I generally do mine by what finish I want, the size of the item, and what mood I'm in. So if I am painting something that needs priming, I will 99% of the time prime with either an airbrush or a spray can, and it will be the size and the fineness of the detail that distinguishes which one I use. If it's big terrain and actually it's got a lot of layer lines because it's FDM, or it's just generally big, I will spray with a rattle can, and I will normally use a Halford's primer because that lacquer based primer eats in really well and is really tough, and priming needs to be tough. That's the most important thing, that it sticks and all your paint then sticks well to it. And also I like to make sure each layer that I use uses a different solvent. So I'll start with a lacquer. I might then paint the base colours as well with a lacquer, because airbrushing you can lacquer over a lacquer, or cellulose based paint like a primer. And then I'll probably do weathering and more painting in acrylics, and then weathering in oils or acrylics, because each of those don't lift the last solvent layer off. But if you were to try and put an enamel wash over a airbrushed lacquer surface, if you leave it to settle for a while, it can start to bring the lacquer back off if you're not careful, depending how long the lacquer's been sat there and how strong everything is. And so you have to just watch. So I always spray paint, always, whether rattle can or airbrushing, my primer. I haven't primed by hand ever, really, and I don't prime with acrylics. I see a lot of people on say the Star Wars Legion Discord going, I'm trying to paint using Vallejo white primer and it doesn't stick. So I know there's definitely brands and colours that are better and worse, and white is actually one of the worst colours to prime in. it's just white pigment isn't as opaque. So I always recommend starting with a nice grey primer, except when I'm doing clones, in which case I do spray white, but I use an airbrush for those. So minis, I have actually spray canned them when I was doing some really quickly. So you can spray can them. I used Army Painter white. People hate it or they love it. It seems to be one of those things where there's good cans and there's bad cans. But it's a cheaper brand, it worked fine. I often just buy off Amazon or whatever. But normally for minis, to avoid inundating them with the gusty wind problem I was talking about earlier, where I get too close and then whoop, that mini has a coagulated, melted face of paint running down it, whoosh. I will always try and use an airbrush for those, and I will use lacquer primers because I only airbrush in lacquers. More about that in a minute. And then once I've got the prime coat down, it's onto base coats. And this is where I really do start to decide between brush painting and spray cans, very much on size. Big things will get a spray can, and I might mask them. My Titanfall helmet was spray canned because of the size of it. It was really big to actually get in. I did get it inside because it was at times for smaller bits, but I've generally done it outside because it's actually quite big to even fit in my airbrush booth, which is the problem I'm having with the buildings. They end up off, so you're spraying out of the booth a lot, which then puts more stuff in the air. But the big sort of stuff, definitely I'll spray with the spray paint, I'll mask it, I'll spray it with the spray paint. Generally though, I try and get the primer the right colour for the colour I want, and I'm mostly spraying grey, white, but I might have a camouflage, an orange or whatever, and I'll spray it, and then I'll use acrylics to do weathering and details and blocks and things like that to draw out the details. And I will brush paint at that point, because there is a point in my head where masking takes longer than brushing. And when I've gone from the masking is going to take longer than the brushing, I will normally go for a brush at that point because I'm too lazy to mask everything. And over here, you can just see it here, is my X-Wing. It's my Dagobah Swamp Scene, and I started masking out the reds on the wing for Red 5. Sadly, there's only like 3 blocks, but it's covered in weed. But people did moan I had the wrong number of blocks, covered in weed. And it took so long to mask, I just gave up, took all the masking off, and just hand painted it with red. And that's where I split between the two. How long is it going to mask to do these colours? If you can keep parts separate, and some people design things in ways that they're separate and then put together so the different colours are kept separate, I would definitely try that. My Titanfall helmet was really knobbly but really big, and actually I did some simple things and some complex things where I masked. So I masked out a logo because that would have been really hard to brush paint. I've ended up painting it actually with a brush later, but it was really bad. I did an awful job. But actually most of it, masking was quite just straight lines for the sort of stripes on it, and then I hand painted everything else because it was just so hard to mask curved surfaces. I went to brush painting. So that's kind of how I go between them. Spray paint big stuff, airbrush medium and small things, especially metallics, and then hand paint everything else. Let's see what chat say though, because a lot of you are doing this a lot, so you will really know what you want. And at the moment, airbrushing is still ahead at 55% and spray cans are at 8%. So there's not many of you doing spray cans, and I've noticed in chat already, a lot of that is to do with the size that you're doing. And also, if you're trying to fill in layer lines on FDM prints, a good spray can coat is much denser and thicker generally, which is one reason I don't use them on minis, is much thicker than you might get with an airbrush, and so it will fill those layer lines a bit more. It will also fill your details, but FDM details are generally more chunky. I certainly have to design them more chunky than I would for a resin. Timber's reminding everyone, 58 watching, it's up to 60 now, only 22 likes, shame on you. So I think that's a subtle way of saying go like, and magically it went up 1 when I said that. But if you haven't liked yet, please do. It makes Timber happy and it makes me happy as well. So Polite says, my first, whoops, and it's gone. Okay. My my first real work with my airbrush was blending the edges of decals into the body colour of a HO truck cabin, and I really managed it. That's good. Well done. It is useful for doing things. So Macaro siding, I use spray cans for priming and then airbrush my end scale structures. Hand paint for extreme fine detail. It seems to me it's all about what you're doing and the coverage you get. You've hit the nail on the head there, definitely. Secret Anorak, I didn't fancy paying for the airbrushing paint extractor thing you see for sale, so I made my own side an old steel cabinet. If it works for you. I notice a lot of people who do like prop size stuff, like helmets like I've been doing, or my entire droids that I'm going to be doing. Newsflash, I'm doing an entire B1 droid. I've already got a pit droid and a folded pit droid printed. They're on the side in pieces. It's quite macabre, really. And they're not going together until after the Kickstarter's out there, so you'll have to wait a while. And I'll probably do the B1 at the same time. But yeah, you can make your own. And I watch people make them all the time. And you can add extra ventilation. Next to my airbrush booth, I have a vent extractor fan that's a really big chunky one. It's about this, get the angle right, it's about that big and about, you know, that long. And I've got a bit of airbrush filter I've cut out and put over one end, and that goes outside. And I just have it running at the same time. And for the last couple of days, it has been sodden with dust. It's dust by the time it gets to it, but the airbrush booth's clogged and I need to take the fan out, the filter out the back. But there we go. RGJ, so Grace, it's okay. That's why Timber says grob to hello to hello us both. And Rob leaves the artwork to me as an artist. He's the electrics. I think it's a great split. But previous live has shown he can paint a model when I nip inside. Don't let him get away with not doing some of it. So loads of people are. So I do wear my FFP3 when spraying though. Okay. FFP3. Tell me what an FFP3 is further down, please, Grace. Tamsin, awkward because second floor flat, steep stairs, dodgy hips, small shared garden, then usually has laundry drying when the weather is good for spraying. Yeah, I don't have laundry drying outside, but my bins were filthy colour, and when I'm doing big stuff I do put plastic down to avoid spray painting my patio as well. I used to do it on the grass, and my grass ended up grey, black and white, spodgy. So John says he used to use spray cans for undercoating but swapped to airbrushing for undercoating and base coats now. Again, it's about size. I would generally airbrush for smaller stuff or anything I want to be really fine. So plastic kits I'd airbrush, 3D prints and resin 3D prints I'd airbrush, but FDM 3D prints I'd probably spray paint. Andy T, I've repaired a scratch on the Queen's Flight Wessex. Red was very specific. I used Vallejo plastic putty, then hundreds of micro paint dots with a very fine brush to make it invisible. That is very impressive. Very hard to buy new ones these days. Okay, I've just got organic solvents rated masks. I'm guessing that's what you're talking about. Rob did use a spray can for 3D printed buildings, but it was a pure float with some cans we got donated. That's cool. Secret Anorak has a top tip. Thin your paint ready for airbrushing, even airbrush ready paint, and use flow improver is a game changer. We'll talk about how to get going with airbrushes because it's only past in a minute. Well, I've got a bit about cleaning it as well. So I just really wanted to talk about when you would use both, and I'm going to start with top tips for spray cans because I've less to say on spray cans, to be honest. But yeah, thinning is really important. So Rob and Grace work in medical and got quite a few during COVID, fit tested as well, so not having to look how easy they are to source online. Yeah, that's very, very lucky of you. I've got a like one that's like this with it's a disposable one, but you can use it for a long time. I know when I stop using my mask when I start smelling the organic solvents. So I can spray so that my room actually set off the smoke alarm the other day that's in there because it was so hazy with paint dust and fumes, and I can't smell it. And I can really smell the fumes. So if you can't smell it, then I'm presuming my organic solvents aren't going through. But I change them every 2 years anyway, just in case. So Grace was asking about flow improver, the thing that catches water buildup. That's something I need to get to mine. So flow improver is something you add to your paint, and we'll talk about those in a minute. What you were talking about is a moisture trap that goes, and actually my Iwata compressor has a water trap anyway, and you're supposed to drain it, and I never really have any water in there. It's most bizarre. And Grace is saying, now you said it, I use the Vallejo white. It doesn't cover as well. I think Vallejo white is a problem. So one thing I'd look at is don't use Vallejo white. I've certainly picked that as a tip from people. Amaze Tay says Alfred white primer is decent, but mostly use Halford grey. I mostly use Halford grey. Actually, my last lot, because it's the colour I want to use, are all Tamiya, which is far more expensive. Tamiya spray, and it's a finer, lighter grey, and it is finer. And if there's one spray can I would recommend for finer plastic models, it's the Tamiyas. They do a really nice fine spray. They're a lot more controlled. They're aimed at models, and they do really nice, good solid. So I definitely recommend the Tamiya fine grey. Their white sucks, but the grey's good. I do use their white, it's just not as good as the grey. It doesn't suck, it just doesn't cover as well. And to me, a primer should colour the base, which is often the wrong colour. I would only use a white primer when I'm actually painting white. So people are talking about COVID, they're glad they're out. We didn't at the start, but by the end we got plenty of PPE. At the start we had nothing walking onto the wards. Okay, that is pretty nasty. Right, let's have a look. Andy, I'm only able to spray in the winter with acrylics due to hibernating tortoises. Oh, bless. And I get what your meaning is, that the rest of the year you can spray with lacquers, but in the winter your tortoises are in the same area, so you have to use acrylics because of the fumes. My house is huffed, so I get that. So Shy Ghost has asked what paints do I prefer for the finish, acrylics or enamels. I don't actually use either of those. I'll talk about what paints I use in a minute when I talk about how to get going in airbrushing. And then Amaze Tays, Model Air, Vallejo Model Air doesn't need any extra thinning for the airbrush, very nice paint. Yeah, I've got some, I don't use it very much because I don't spray acrylics now. Oh, Norm says, I like Tamiya Fine Primer in a can. Great for not eliminating fine details. Another vote for the Tamiya Fine Primer, and I don't think I'd mentioned it when he wrote this. Tamsin, models are too big to fit in the spray booth. Ah, yes, like when I was priming and painting my Type S a year ago. I did my Type S in 15mm, 28mm, so it's about half the size, and I struggled with it. It's massive. It was about this big. Yours must be massive, and that's why my stuff ends up outside, because it's too big. The good thing about a lot of the FDM prints is that they're modular, so you can actually pull them apart. They're made to be modular because they have to fit on the printer. So you pull them apart and they're normally clippable. But I was being lazy with my spaceport, and I've just left everything clipped together and sprayed my really big chunky buildings in one go because I was being lazy. Grace, my next task other than priming is clouds on our walls. I tried a test piece. Any recommendations for water build-up stoppers? I don't know is the answer for that. Maybe you'll get one further down. Moisture trap. Grace, certainly a problem with random splatters and no idea, constantly stopping to clean the tip, and even then it splashes straight afterwards sometimes. That is definitely a problem with acrylics. So we'll talk about some of these issues coming up. So we've got another vote for Vallejo Model Air, but he still thins a bit more. Okay, thinning is very much a thing for airbrushes. So Timber says you need some flow improver, Grace. Talk you through what you need after live. So Timber's going to talk to Grace about it afterwards, and that's really cool. But yeah, my real name, right, is I think what you're inline airbrush water traps. I think they're also called moisture traps. Yeah, so they're really useful. What they do is they take the water out of your air. So if you're spraying with a non-acrylic, you know, something that's not water-based, it's even more important because having water droplets in your paint can really cause issues. Okay, so Timber Surf, FFP3 is 0.3 micron filtration, the lowest level you can get. Right, so I just buy stuff that's organic solvents rated because I'm spraying organic solvents, and I don't know what micron level they are, but they will go, they are so small. And I've got Vallejo Flow Improver, I do use it on things. Right, Adam's going to be making his own spray booth in the summer and maze a cooker hood for extraction. I think that's a good idea. When I'm spray painting, I often put the kitchen cooker hood fans on. Because what happens is, you spray paint inside, and I run out of space in my little room quite quickly, and I go and put stuff out in the kitchen to just dry. But paints don't stop stinking if they're lacquer-based. As soon as you've stopped painting them, they will actually stink and stink out your house for hours afterwards as the paint cures and all of the solvents evaporate off. So it's not just a case of you have to protect that room. I also have all the fans going in my kitchen where the paints are sitting to dry. You know, this is big stuff. I'm doing a lot. I meant to do it as I went and I didn't this time. Just like the last 2 times. So Grace's FFP3 is a mask used a lot in hospitals. The ones also have a little filter. We got fit tested at work, so we always recommend to anyone that uses them to have a proper fit test. So the one I've got is hang on, it's literally around the corner. If you are not in a hospital, this is the kind of thing that you want. This is a 3M, I don't know, go for the organic solvents one. It's got adjustable straps, so it's tight against your head. This plasticky, rubbery thing, look how much dust there is on this. There's nothing on the inside. That does not let anything through. It sits against your nose. I end up with these big red marks here. And this is, you can see how grey it is. This was new the end of last year. And this is mostly dust on the outside that you see from particulates. Even if you're doing acrylics, if you put a lot out, you'll still get the particulates and they're not good for your lungs. But look how much there is there. I actually put old glasses on as well, which have got a little mark here from just the spray paint running up onto my nose, blasting up here. But these also then, they come in here, but they come out here. There's a non-return valve. So you're not breathing out through this filter. It comes out this way. This is what you're looking for if you're spraying anything that's noxious. With acrylics, you probably don't need to go to organic solvent rated, but all of these features, the fit, everything is vital. Otherwise, you will be splitting headaches. If you talk to anybody who sprayed lacquers in their bedroom as a child, they will talk to you about the splitting headaches it gave them. And you want to avoid that. So yeah. Okay, so, and also, you know, you're not going to get a proper fit test on anything at home, so this is the best thing you're going to get for home. If you have proper PPE from a hospital, that's brilliant. Sadly, most of us don't. So, yeah. And Stephen says, FFP3 means Face Fit Protection 3. Wow. So Grace says, I made the mistake the first time of tasking the airbrush after using it. So FFP3 went on. You will tasting. If you don't wear it, if you were to blow your nose, you'll blow paint out your nose. It's not a good thing. So there we go. So Grace says, we used Halford Grey primer when we had the Hornby Bridge. It seemed to cover well, but we'll certainly source a new primer for the airbrush. I'm going to talk about primers in a sec now. So we're going to start talking about airbrushes. But first, I'm going to cover off spray painting and I have a few tips. Polite says, during COVID, I airbrushed the biological hazard symbol on a few FFP2 masks. It's probably very wise. Secret Anorak, Vallejo Tamiya White or a paint airbrush. I cheat and use Vallejo White primer followed by Vallejo Gloss Varnish. That's very good. I often just stick at primer. If I'm painting something grey, I will often just use the primer, then weather, and then put a varnish on. If you look at my terrain, it's either Vallejo or it's one of the Halfords reds or greys or whites or something. It's rarely an actual paint colour because that's just the colour palette that I use. Oh, and thanks, Thorn. It's chinoiserie. It's got little balls to play with and the little men in the arms. Very nice. Family passed it down. He said he liked my chair, for those of you wondering what I'm talking about. So Grace, oh Kathy, yeah, that's the higher level than the P3s. I only use them as we have a whole box full at the moment. So this is really good for organic solvents. And bear in mind, I've just spent 3 hours one afternoon painting organic solvents. And at the end of it, I still couldn't spray them till I went out. And I was like, whoa, my house stinks. And I went round to my mum's to get out the house. So, you know, it is really a step up for organic solvents. And then JSP masks, what I use with goggles and organic, because I wear glasses, I don't wear goggles. And organic solvent filters fitted are good for paints and resin 3D printing. Yeah, I mean, I also use this mask if I'm doing a lot of resin work as well. So, right, I'm going to just put my little video on, because I did a little video, it's like 20 minutes, with my top tips. And the first one is, with spray paints, you want to shake. And I got this drill thing. It wasn't cheap, but it's basically, you put it in your drill. The drill's running out of battery if you wonder why it's so slow. And it saves you. There's two different sleeves inside. This spray putty is actually thicker than it, but a Halford spray can go straight in, and you can literally just spray, you know, just spin your paint cans. Now, I'd heard somewhere, like someone on Instagram who does the most beautiful spray work. He sprays for the industry. You know, he is not a hobbyist. He is a professional spray painter. And he said rolling them like that is better than shaking them. But when I came to paint this building, I discovered that it hadn't, I either hadn't done it for long enough or it hadn't shaken. And I had to do it a bit of the old fashioned up and down. Won't do too much of that. But you know, you need to give it, I probably say about 45 seconds to a minute, and I spin it on the drill, and I still give it a bit of a shake as well. Now, that is really vital. The number one thing about spray painting is you need to shake them a lot, because you need to mix in the propellant, the paint, and the paint will have sedimented out. That you need to be hearing that ball bearing inside rattling, and you need to do it for longer than you think. It really is vital. And the other top tip I have a huge white spatter down the side of my bin. Never let your first spray from a spray can be on your model. Always spray to the side, because the first bit coming out, especially on a new can, is normally really gross and blobby. Now, if your spray isn't fine enough, and when I'm spraying inside, I'm not that fussed. But if I was spraying in colder conditions outside, or if I'm spraying some paints, I don't generally bother with this, but a lot of people swear by it. You can put your cans in hot water and you'll get a smoother paint finish. Now, I'm spraying FDM prints at the moment. I'm not looking for a smoother spray finish. If I want a smoother spray finish, I will go to the airbrush. But that hot water can make such a difference, especially if you're spraying outside, to just getting a nice finish with some brands. Right, so Grace says, wait, is this a video that I've missed? No, this is my Kickstarter that I'm just painting at the moment. The video is, this is about all I've got 2 layers of spray putty and 2 layers of grey paint on them. And then tomorrow I will be masking up the orange, because they're grey and orange, the buildings. But I can't quite decide. One of them needs to go white, and I have too many buildings. Because the trouble with doing a Kickstarter is you design everything, and then you you kind of end up with 3. So I've got a complete building that hasn't, like this one, it's solid on the bottom, has no interior, it's not modular, you just print it and clip it together if it's too big to go on your print bed, which this one's massive. And that's it, really. That's all you do. Some of them are modular, so they're clipped together multiply. So each of those needed a separate test print. And this one actually was a failed test print. The bits on the side weren't right, so I reprinted it again to check they were right. And one's one without the floor. So this is an older failed one. And as a result, I've got 3 of this size building, all of which have got painted to a certain level, and I'll probably give them away or something at some point. But, you know, it's very much a case of the video is coming as soon as I get around to painting them, which should be this week. And I haven't mentioned my Kickstarter. I put the link right at the start of chat. Here we go. This is my latest Kickstarter. I think it's on the photo slideshow. Woohoo. Here we go. This is my latest Kickstarter. It is Severna Spaceport. It is a spaceport. This is the ones I've designed so far. There's loads of scatter coming at the moment. So this is my brief commercial interlude to say, you know, there's actually a few more designs than on there. They're all either modular or they are complete. You can just print them and plonk them on. I know most of you don't do terrain for tabletop games. As I said at the beginning, I've played Star Wars Legion this afternoon, but these are just fun sort of spaceport related things. Great for an RPG as well. Go well with Traveller. I've played a lot of Starfield, which I may have confessed to already at the start of this as well. And so there's a lot of Starfield influence in it, especially in the cargo crates that I'm in the middle of print. They're not got to the test printers yet. They're designed, but not there. So this is basically going to be a whole spaceport full of just exciting airport-styled buildings, you know, as you'd see in an airport. And at some point I'll do Severna Sprawl, which is the sprawl beyond the airport with all the cantinas and the gift shops and the maintenance shops, part shops, all that kind of stuff. But that's probably this time next year at this rate. So that is my next Kickstarter. It's tentatively scheduled for the 13th of February, which should be all right. I should be there. I'm nearly finished on everything's designed, practically apart from the stretch goals and 3 or 4 scatter items. So yeah, that's all there. I put the link in chat. Feel free to go and check it up and sign up and make me feel like people want to actually buy it. Back to here, and we'll get this again. Ooh, right. Right, here we go. Norm says that's cool. Grandpa Rail says neat. Grace said, was this a video I've missed, which I've already explained. Love that tool, says Amaze Taze, saves 5 minutes of shaking, which it does. Now, I can't say it was the cheapest tool I've ever bought, but it is a really useful tool. So if you do a lot of spray cans, I'd recommend getting one. It's just in a normal drill, you know, nothing more exciting than that. And I can't, oh, now Amaze Taze says, what's that drill attachment called? I think it's called a paint. I think I put in drill paint shaker or something to get it. Yeah, it's really cool. I've seen people make their own, but it's basically a bolt, a metal container, and then the 2 sheaves. If nobody here is too bothered, let me go to Amazon and go to my orders and go to paint. Paint. This is just going to completely. Oh, I've just got paint everywhere. Just so much paint. Oh, 2 pages of paint. There we are. It's called a spray paint mixer. I will put a link to the one that I bought. It's 20 quid. And now I've just got to go and find all my little windows again. Whoops. That window. So this is the one that I bought for those of you who want to have a look at it. You don't have to buy it, but it will give you an idea then of which one I bought. So yeah, my real name right. My daughter had a makeup brush cleaner which looks similar to your drill setup. Yes, I borrowed it. I will give it back. Yes, and Bill just says sputter. And Bill, you're late, but don't worry, you're here. Better late than never. And there's always catch up. Timber, rolling in one plane will not mix it top to bottom. If you use that device, you would need to rotate the axis so the ball travels up and down the length of the can. I actually hold it on its side and move it a bit up and down to get the ball to go a little bit. But I do then shake the old-fashioned way as well. But what it does is it gets all the sediment out the bottom, which is really cool. So Timber always heats his cans unless it's the height of summer. I just find they float in the water, and then I get water on the spray thing, and then it annoys me. So I often don't. So Saint A&M Railway says, I use the drill mix but make sure the balls roll at both the bottom and the top by tilting the can and drill below the horizontal. That's very cool, and that's probably what you should be doing. You want it. The problem, the second one I was showing, it's a bit, it only just is in, but you want to tip it. Tim says it makes the, this is heating the cans, makes the paint dry faster when it's warmer, stops clogging in the cold and offsets the cooling of the can as you use up the propellant. So there we go. 3 good reasons to warm your cans. And Bill says it's a go-to in the workshop. Yeah, I'm just lazy. And also, I don't find it the Tamiya sprays beautifully without it, so I've never really worried. So Grace has got to dash and help Rob. Watch and reply. Bye, Grace. Thanks for dropping in. Stuart, cool, I love Starfield. Yay, I love Starfield. I hit I can't remember how much it was something like 11 days, sorry. So I'm over 250 hours on it, let's just put it that way. And then Nosterek says, I saw you use the Green Stuff World weathering stick sponges and I got them, but I don't know how to cut them or whatever it is to get them ready to use. Any suggestions? I just poke them out the top. I never cut them. And I'm still using the original bit and I wash them out. So I just poke them out the top. I haven't cut them at all. I just pushed them in using a brush tip. A brush, you know, the end of it, not the brushy part. What's the geodesic dome? The geodesic dome, that one, in the middle, which I don't know if you can actually see my mouse when I'm waggling over it, but the one in the middle here, there's 3 sizes of it, and it's a communications array, effectively. So it's there's a, to the left of it, there's a dish, and then there's a comm link to the left of that. And there's a really big dish that's like massive on top of the comms building. So the idea is they go on the comms building, or you can use them separately as cover and scatter. And you can print small, medium or large, depending how big you want your size to be. So there we go. Right, loads of people saying goodbye and hello. So bye everybody. Right, new Durham Junction Model Array. Hello all, first time in here. Nice to have you. Always good to have someone new in. Hang on, it keeps... Clayman, I'd love a variant of that can spinner for little Vallejo type bottles, maybe a long tube, you slide them in and drill spin them. I've got the little vibrating one that for those. I don't find it's amazing, but you know, the best thing I find is putting a ball bearing in, if not easy with the Vallejo, but putting a ball bearing in and shaking. McCary siding. Living in Canada for a good part of the year, I cannot spray outside, so I built a large spray booth that vents to the outside, but I still have to deal with the smell, so I wear a mask from 3M. I think it's really wise. Your health is too important not to wear the mask. So, so Craig's arrived as Grace has gone. Adam says hello. Right, quick mix paint can mixer, says Timber. Oh, excellent. He's got a different one to me, but and there we are. I put the link, so everybody who's thanking me, do Google search. There it is. You can also get SDLs or buy 3D print ones. I didn't know that, Timber. That's fascinating. I would 3D print an FDM rather than resin for that, because I suspect the resin would break. But, you know, they're out of stock. I sent a link to the blue one, so there are other colours, I think, of course. But it's more so that you know what it was, so you perhaps know what the keywords are to search on Amazon. So Stuart says, I sometimes use my ultrasonic cleaner to shape my little Vallejo bottles. Well, that's interesting. And just stand them all together, packed together reasonably tight, set for a few minutes and let them shake away. Oh, that's interesting. So yeah, there's a few people saying they've found them in other places. So apparently Adam Savage from Tested showed off a similar project and it breaking on the video. This is metal mine, so it's not going to break. Right, so that we get on a little bit, I just want to talk now about what I'm doing here. So I'm spraying putty, because I always spray putty big buildings that I can't be bothered to sand. And then, I know I'm spraying putty because it is, well, it's the can and it's still white. And spray putty is just great. You can get it in the UK. If you're in North America, I'm really sorry, I don't think you can get spray putty. If you're in Europe or the UK, yes, you can. But it sprays like a spray paint, so here we go. I am trying to hold this 12 inches away. It's really hard, really, really hard. But realistically, you don't want your paint to dry before you get there. And I did light dust coats with some Montana Shock White. It's like white chocolate. Whoops, they're trying to, I've actually stuck a lot of those to the base now. But what I found was it was really dusty. And I don't know if I was spraying it too far away or just being really light coat, and that real light coat then caused issues. Yeah, I didn't edit this video very well, did I? Look at that awful headshot there. I didn't notice that, I just did it quickly and thought it was just the one. But anyway, yeah, we'll just pass, just ignore that. Listen to me talking. But what I found was it was really dusty, and then it just came off in my hand when I went over it. So it's really important to get the distance right. And it will be different for each spray can. Obviously a Tamiya spray can is a smaller bottle. It may have a different amount of propellant than something like this, which is a bigger bottle. So you do need to be careful, but you want to be back and forth. You don't want to start in the same place that you're spraying when you're spraying on it. You want to make sure you almost start to the side and come across. That first spray can be a little bit more dumpy. So you don't want to, you just want to make sure you're even. And the biggest problem I find with spray cans is they're so big, I sometimes dump loads, and this is where I hadn't shaken it properly. I'd only done the drill, so it wasn't spraying very well. I found that it can be really hard to get it even when you're trying to spray something in the back, because you hit the bit at the front and you don't notice because you're looking at the bit at the back. So it is about being observant where your spray is going and what you're spraying. And also, you know, these little turntables are great. I put most of mine on card. I ran out of card, so I ended up with spraying everything twice, leaving a handhold and then coming back and spray painting the handhold later on some of the later buildings. But realistically, what you're after is a nice even coat. Never try and do too much. There are 2 coats of spray putty on all of these to build it up nice and gently, and there are probably 2 coats of grey on some of them, but mostly just 1 coat of grey, because actually I find the primer coats really well. So yeah, top tips. The reason I would often spray 2 is 1 from one direction and turn it around the other way and spray the other from the other direction, so that you catch both directions, and the turntable's great for that. So these are almost spray can tips that will work with airbrushes. Now you can see the amount of dust this is putting off. I really don't recommend spray canning inside if you can do it outside. Even if you need to get yourself a sheltered little marquee or something. You can see to the right there is my extra fan. That is now white with spray from one day of spray paint, spraying Tamiya. It's kind of gone pale grey. It's a really huge amount of volume this puts out. You will have dust. All my surfaces are now dusty, so you will have dust everywhere, and it's important that you manage that and you don't spray anywhere, because a spray can will overwhelm this airbrush booth just like that, just too much. It's too much output for the airbrush booth, and it's a good airbrush booth. Now, the other thing I wanted to show here was I use a lot of card with masking tape. I just turn the ends of the masking tape underneath and sort of pull it tight so it's sort of stuck to the card at the ends. And then I use it to hold down all the small ones. I do this with airbrushing as well, because you will find the airbrush has enough power, as does a spray can, to knock them off, and they won't stand upright. So you want to make sure everything's firmly attached. The other thing I use when I'm airbrushing minis, especially, or Gundam parts, are the sticks with little clips on the end. The ones I've got are placeholders because they're a little shorter, but you can get them all over the place. It's just like paint holders, or mine were placeholders actually. But yeah, you can do that. It's for smaller pieces that have got interiors you can kind of clip into, or you can use blue tack and put it onto a stick or something, and that will hold lighter pieces. So there we go. Those single mini paint shakers are very expensive. That's true. I treat myself to tools. It's my day job. It's my full-time job. I just spend a lot of time. And whatever happens, I really think you just need to shake everything by hand as well. So the vibratory can shaker for a drill. I'm going to look that up later, but I won't click now. That looks very exciting. So dusty flaky paint, Timber says, is a function of the paint drying before hitting the object, which I think can be 2 reasons. One, it can be it was a really hot day, which it could have been. It was quite a hot day, I think, when I was spraying it. So the normal distance was too far. 2, it was I was too far away. Clay, do it ghetto style. Spray in Amazon boxes outside and run. You definitely could. So there we go. People are excitingly looking on Amazon. Secret Anorak says he uses a similar method to hold it down, but he uses double-sided tape on foam board. I tried double-sided tape, and I actually pulled the ankle off a mini because the double-sided tape was so strong. Masking tape's weaker, that's why I use it. It's just weaker, was the reason I use it, no other. So you can see here, I'm very happily spray painting. Now this is my airbrush booth. I've pimped it up a bit. I have those lights on the inside, and they're dimmable. They're just LED strip. And one of the most key things when you're spray painting is to make sure you always have sort of good lighting. Before this, I used to use 2 lamps over my airbrush. And yeah, it took up a lot of space on the ground, the sort of desktop, which I didn't have. This is Tamiya, this is the favourite spray can primer. Now, if you don't have an airbrush booth or you're just getting into airbrushing, where do you start? Well, you can do it outside in certain weathers, but you can get a mask and then put it somewhere with an extractor fan, but you'll get a load of dust. So I recommend when you buy an airbrush, you really do stump up and get a booth. If you're spraying acrylics, it's less of a problem. But if you're spraying anything like I'm going to recommend, or spray cans, This stuff will just stink your house out, and it's not what you want. This is a little room. I then have my kitchen, and then I have my hall, and then I have the room I sit in. So I've got 3 doors between me and this, and I still will sometimes leave the house when I've spray painted just to get out of the smell. So let's talk airbrushing. This is spray canning. That's all I'm really going to say on spray cans. So let's just check nobody else has anything else to say. Tamda says, when I have to spray and I can't go outside, that's exactly how I do it in my bathroom. Mask on, window open, close the door. And I think that's a really good idea, you know, to have somewhere with an extractor fan, because you can then just open the windows, but you can leave the extractor fan running. So I leave the lights on in this room because the extractor fan's linked, and I leave that extra extractor running. Now, if you've got an airbrush booth like this, change the airbrush filters regularly. Mine's due a change, but because I was spray canning this, I thought I'm just going to do all this spray canning and then I'm going to change it. And you can see the colours. If I take that off, the back of this filter, because the front is quite it's like a glass wool, the back is absolutely solid colour of paint, and it goes up inside, and you literally just need to make sure that your airbrush booth filters are changed, or your airbrush booth isn't going to do much. Buy the one with the most suck you can get, a high powered suck. And actually, I don't find the airbrush booth on its own is enough. Now, I bought the one that had a different back that would do organic solvents, and you could put organic solvent charcoal filters in there. And what I found was the charcoal filters didn't take the organic solvents out, and I didn't have an external extraction. I didn't want to drill a hole in here. And I had a builder in next door who I chatted to every day over COVID. We saw each other every day for about 2 years where he was renovating next door. And he came and drilled me a hole above this cabinet. And I have both of the pipes going up to the hole up high. I don't think it's ideal because it's a long distance for it to travel. And, you know, I'm not sure the extractor fan sucks as well as it should. But I didn't put the charcoal filter in after a while because I just found, yes, it takes some organic solvents out, but nothing beats venting externally. And I can't even open the window in this room because it doesn't have an opening window. It was a garage, and so it doesn't have an opening window originally, and they didn't change the window. So I literally cannot open a window in here. I have extractor fans in both rooms either side, and I leave those running, and then the extractor fan in here, and then the extra extractor and the airbrush booth, all of which vent externally, and it will still take a day to clear the final residue of smells. And I leave things in these rooms to cure and dry if I'm not painting outside. Outside, I'll leave them as long as I possibly can. In fact, I've even let them get rained on before now, just so that the smell goes off outside. Timber, top tip for LED lights in the booth, cover with tape down cling film and replace when it gets opaque. That's a really good idea. I hadn't really noticed these getting dimmer, but yes, that's a really good idea. Hi Richard, you made it. You said you would, and you're here. I spray can the undercoat and the main base colour, then brush paint subsequent colours. I think that's a really good idea. I'm actually going to end the poll, so because if I don't end it, people afterwards can't see the poll, I've discovered. So I have to end it so you can see it. There we go, 98 votes. So that's 100 people, and most people prefer airbrushing, which surprises me because we're now going to talk airbrushing, which we seem to have snuck onto. Right, let's just let that run a little bit more. And then I'll pause it before we get to airbrushing. So the first thing to say is I'm not very good at airbrushing. I use it as a tool. I use it for base coats. I use it for priming. I am not a fine detail control on my airbrush person. I do also use it for panel lining. And if you've seen any of my recent Star Wars or like any of my spaceships I've done basically, or the lat or anything like that, what you'll have seen is around the panel lines I spray black, it's pre-shading, and then I go over it with the main coat, a couple of coats of white or something. And I started to like my airbrush when 2 things happened. So I started off using an airbrush back in 2000 or so, somewhere back there. So we're talking quite a long time ago. Bought my first one, Badger. And it was okay. I thinned my paint with window cleaner, with ammonia or without ammonia, or whatever it was. And I did all sorts of exciting things that were the rage back 20 years ago. And I never got the thinning ratios right. It would dry on the tip. I struggled immensely. And then Peli Soberg, I went and saw him, and I mentioned earlier on how he used a cup and he mixed it. And someone gave me a recipe, and I'm pretty sure it was Mick Bonwick from when I went to Missenden Abbey. And he gave me a recipe for acrylic that went something like 3 paint, 2 thinner, 1 flow improver. And so it's basically half and half ratio. And he was really good, very good, taught me how to clean it. And I'll show you the method he taught me for cleaning after a few bits on paint. So I got my airbrush. I got a massive industrial sized compressor, which was so loud you could hear it from down the street when it was going. And it was meant for nail guns, you know, those pneumatic pressured ones. And it was so heavy, when I took it up the loft to do work on my railway, it required 2 of us to get it up the loft. And it was like massive. So that got upgraded to an Iwata it's got a tank, but it's not a big one. And I did that. So yeah, that was kind of my opening, and it was Badger, and it had this big cup that I always ran out of paint, and I really sucked. I hated it. I hated cleaning it. Still hate cleaning my airbrush. Hated everything to do with airbrushes. Rarely airbrushed. Fast forward the years, and I went to Missenden Abbey. I saw Peli Soberg, and I was still spray painting acrylics, but I moved away from them. And what really got me away from acrylics and into love with my airbrush again, I started off spraying enamels, and I didn't thin those very well. And what really got me into it, this is going to sound really sad, I learned that, and this was from Gundam, you can pre-thin lacquer paints. You can thin the whole tub of lacquer paints. You can put it in one of those little screw cap shaker bottles with a screw cap. They're like, you get them on Amazon, and they have those twist top cap and, big bottle. You can get them in different sizes. So I've got little ones and big ones, and my primer goes in big ones and my little one goes here. And I mix everything on a ratio with Mr. Colour Leveling Thinner, 1.5. And you get your little paint pot. It's like a Tamiya pot. You empty the paint out. Then you fill it up to the paint level with leveling thinner, put the top on, shake, and do the top, put it into your, shaker bottle, and then you fill it up half full. I tend to overthin because I'm not quite sure my halves are halves. Put the lid on, shake like mad, perfectly clean all the paint out your pot at this point, pour it into that container, shake that up, and that'll last forever. They do eventually dry out when they get right down to the bottom. You probably should top them off at that point. But lacquers can be reconstituted very easily. You can actually get a reconstituting lacquer thinner that will bring back dead lacquer bottles. And you can mix them up and they will last forever. I've got some that are really ancient now, and they last for years. And lacquers don't clog your tips. I've got a consistent spray thinned paint, so I'm always consistently spraying exactly the same. And I use Mr. Colour, or I buy SMS pre-thinned paints and use those. So I know every time I'm painting with a set amount. Mr. Surfacer is a brilliant primer. It's white's good as well. So I'm going to spray a white primer. It'll be Mr. Surfacer. They are all really good. Every single one of those paints I love. The metallics I spray are All Clad, which has now gone out of production in the UK, but you can still get in the US. And now you have to buy a stand by MIG, which is just more expensive, and is totally out of availability at the moment. So I've got some on back order with some people, but it's really hard to get hold of All Clad. But I've got hundreds, but I ran out of Chrome, which is the one I use the most. And I use those, and they're lacquer metallics. So I have moved entirely to spraying lacquers through my airbrush. It does occasionally clog at the start. So when I pick my airbrush up and I've got my airbrush and it's sat here and I want to spray it, what I've often found is the first time you put your paint in, you mix it all up, you put it in, you go to spray and nothing comes out. The air comes out, and you've tested it, but no liquid comes out. So what I do now is I put a little bit of Mr. Colour brush cleaner or Mr. Colour Cleaner. It's Tool Cleaner, that's it, Mr. Colour Tool Cleaner. So it's called Mr. Tool Cleaner. I put a bit of that in, just a few drops with a pipette, and I spray, and if it doesn't come out, I'm like, okay, and I can undo my airbrush. Sometimes it needs tightening up. Sometimes it's just that the needle is stuck a little bit and I have to pull it in and out. And lacquers are so much easier to clean off. If you run lacquer thinner through an airbrush, it will generally clean out all the crud. So that was my big moment when I went to loving airbrushing, was when I moved to spraying lacquers. Now, if you live in a house with hibernating tortoises, or you live in somewhere without external ventilation, lacquers are not a good idea. But if you live somewhere where you can do lacquers, I find them much easier to spray. I also have used Tamiya, and you can spray those with lacquer thinners, even though they're in acrylic. And I used to prefer spraying Tamiya to Vallejo. I was using Vallejo model colour, and I found it really inconsistent, probably because I didn't shake it consistently, but I found it really, really hard to get the thinning right. And different paints require different amounts of thinning. So my recommendation for you when you're starting is to start with some ready-made airbrush paints. You may not have all the colours you want, and you may want to thin them a little bit more, but at least you know they'll go through your airbrush and they won't cause you any problems, and you can widen from there. But you know, Vallejo do model air. I've got some Comart, which I don't use, so I'm probably going to take into my next scale, Solihull scale modeller's meet to get rid of them. But you know, I have some pre-mixed ones, and you can just put them in your airbrush and paint. Now, some of them do need extra thinning, and you can do that as your next step in the hobby. But basically, get your airbrush, whether you want to pay a lot of money out at first, or whether you've bought a cheaper one. I recommend you probably start with a cheaper one. I started with the propellant cans. They soon run out and they're not great, but it's a good way to see whether you really enjoy it, whether you find it useful, whether you want to get going. And when you've got that, the next step is really a little compressor and an airbrush, and just go for it and see what you think before you go to the more expensive ones. But what you really need to do is, and this is my biggest problem, was thinning my paints and getting the acrylics not to spatter. Now you can get your little paint recipes. The 321 was one I had, and you can add flow improver, which is basically glycerine, and flow improver often doesn't thin the paint because it's a little bit more viscous, but it does stop it sort of drying as quickly, so it doesn't dry on your tip of your airbrush, which is where they particularly dry. And you can just get a cotton bud. Never use cotton buds inside your airbrush, but you can get a cotton bud, put it in a bit of the solvent for your whatever it is, you know, the best solvent you can find, airbrush cleaner or whatever, and you know, use it to clean off that tip when it starts clogging. But if you're going to spray acrylics, and they are harder to spray but more user friendly from a health point of view, then I do recommend those particular sort of items. Flow improver, thinner. And I always buy the thinner for the brand. I know other people say you can use other ones, but go back to my window spray cleaner thinning. I've actually just found it, I don't spray enough, so that the price of the thinner, specifically for Tamiya, which is not water-based in the same way as the others, it's a slightly different style of paint because it's a lacquer acrylic lacquer. You know, they do react better with their own thinners. And I don't recommend you learn by trying to spray your brush painting paint through your airbrush. So that was one of my problems. I was using Vallejo model paints, some of which you shouldn't spray paint because they actually have colours like cadmium in there, which are lethal when you paint them into atomizing. So those are kind of my tips for getting going. Get your thinning sorted, thinning your paint. Buy pre-thinned paint to start with. You can do that as well in most brands. I don't know about enamels, but certainly lacquers and acrylics, you can get pre-thinned paints. SMS do pre-thin lacquers. It maybe costs more because the bottles are expensive, but then you don't get as much as if you'd mixed it yourself. But it's just worth the knowing that it's not the wrong thickness, which is, I think, the biggest problems I had as a novice. Right, let's go look at chat and see if they've got any tips. So Clayman says, this shocks me. I thought most people by far would be brush painting. So did I. I was really surprised. And brush painting won for the first 2 minutes. And I can't vote, so I didn't vote. And then it was airbrushing. And I'm like, really? Nobody I know likes airbrushing. And Norm then says, most people when asked would say they aren't very good airbrushers. So yeah, it's fascinating. And Russ really says it, airbrushing counts for large areas, brushes in small areas and details. But welcome aboard, Russ, again. Nice to see you back. Richard, I worked in a company that had a spray booth and painters for painting fiberglass bodies, and I know how difficult it is to mix the paint and clean the guns afterwards. That put me off getting one. So we'll talk about cleaning. I've got better at cleaning, and lacquers clean better than acrylics because lacquer thinners are more noxious. Okay, but that's why I'm saying buy pre-thinned. Hi Wardle Restorations, nice to have you with us. And I would recommend for weathering. I don't think, so there's things I don't think you can do by hand for large areas. One, I can't get a nice smooth flat surface on a large area without brush painting. Look at my Titanfall helmet when I do that. It's hidden here behind there, but I sucked big time trying to use artist acrylics, which I shouldn't have been using, but they were what I had out, and no, it was a nightmare not putting in brush marks. So big flat areas, definitely a spray brush. Metallics, definitely a spray brush. Priming, smoother with a spray brush, airbrush or spray can. But yeah, things that require light dust coats, fine weathering sprays, you're just going to struggle to do it by hand. That light haze of dust on the side of a boxcar or a wagon, you just can't do that by hand as easily. You can do it, but it's hard. Russ, cleaning the airbrush is a pain. Oh, yep, definitely. So Bill, acetone and trichloroethylene are not nice chemicals to breathe. They are so not. Trichloroethylene. I did wonder, but it's fine. I actually probably would have guessed trichloroethylene. Bill, you're right, and that's why we'll mention the mask again. And the external venting, and the keeping it going for a long time and don't go in those rooms. So people are using monochrome paint pen refills, very silver. I actually use monochrome pen myself, and they are great, and they are getting better. There is a mirachrome from the Hustle culture, or whatever it is, that does really good as well. I think the metallic brush paints have improved, but I still think, the metallics are just easier for bigger areas. So Clay says he's got a few of the pens you pour into bottles. Yeah. Bill, doubt anyone notices. Right, Russ, I use paint pens for some of my figures. I've used paint pens. We mentioned them further up. But yeah, they are useful. They're called Gundam markers or paint markers or things like that. Really useful. Yeah, I'm not going to be a spelling police on chat. Never. If you were writing an essay for me and I was marking it, which I never would because I'm not a teacher, I'd certainly do your spelling. Any other time? Unless you're working for me, no. So Tamsin says, for airbrush painting, I use Vallejo Model Air and Game Air mostly, but sometimes do thin model colour, needs more thinner and flow improver. And I think as you get more confident, you can add in some of the wider range of paints. I would recommend getting one brand and sticking to it and learning its quirks and how it paints. My problem, if anything, is I've generally over-thinned and I end up with not enough paint, and then I flood my surface trying to get the paint to cover it because I've over-thinned. And you need to do 5 or 6 coats then to make up because you've over-thinned or add more paint in. Whereas if it's pre-thinned, it's more likely to be too thick rather than too thin, and it's more likely just not to spray well. So Secret Anorak says, to clean after airbrushing, I spray water through it. I'm using acrylics and a bit of airbrush cleaner, then 10 minutes in at ultrasonic at 60 degrees. Rinse and deionise water and let it dry. We're going to talk about that. That sounds great. And I have used ultrasonic cleaners a lot. Yeah. So Clay also uses the air paints for just brush painting without water. Yeah, if you thin your paints regularly, as everybody does, it can be really nice. So Polite says, Kathy won't like hearing this. Green Stuff World Chrome, not the one for the airbrush, is basically identical to Molotow but significantly cheaper. Yeah, I can imagine. They do tend... Green Stuff World, I like their products. They just did a set of fluorescent static grass. But what people moan about is the fact they always rip off other people's, they don't create their own works. But then I've seen all the military modelers, one does something and then they all do it. All these speed paints, one does one and then suddenly contrast paints are everywhere. They all do it, everybody does it. But yeah. So Clay, maybe we should have a Airbrushes Anonymous. Everybody now says, like Clay, I'm a bad airbrusher. Yeah, I'm a bad airbrusher. And Polite's put up the GSW 2454 chrome metal. So there we go. If you want to brush paint, that would be good. So yeah, my real name right says, I was told to thin my paint down until it was the consistency of semi-skimmed milk. What does semi-skimmed milk look like? I mean, I don't drink milk ever. I hate milk. I pour it on my cereal, at which point, yeah, I have cereal once in a blue moon. I have hot water on my muesli in the morning. I would, you know, I just, and I look at it and I cannot collate a green paint thinned to whether it looks like semi-skimmed milk. I'm just like, what? And actually, maybe I have skim milk at home. Is it like skimmed? I could never work out what on earth that meant, which might be why I have so many problems thinning my paint. Oh, Monique's arrived. Morning to Brisbane, Monique. And Bill's in the evening, so he's more my time. There we go. Right. I'm just going to press play. Whoops. On this. So this is me putting on Mr. Surfacer 1500 with an airbrusher. Pre-thinned. Really like it. It's my go-to. And this is my Iwata Eclipse. Now, this is actually edited for the video. So it's quite short. And I'm now I actually did a black primer and then I did a black gloss. And this is because I'm doing metallic. And I was really, really in a rush because I wanted to get this done. So I hair dried it. If you don't own a hairdryer and you're doing a lot of airbrushing of layers and you want to get on, go buy a hairdryer. They are absolutely brilliant for quickly drying paint, so you can put the next layer down. Now lacquers dry far more quickly. My problem is I can never tell whether a gloss is dry because it's glossy, and I don't want to touch it in case I put a finger mark in it. But a hairdryer, just put over the top and then you can put your next layer on. And when I'm moving between acrylic and lacquer and whatever the next coats are, I'll leave it 24 hours. But to solidify, to let it out gas and do all those stuff. But when I'm just spraying layers and layers of lacquers, which for metallic, I will normally have sprayed a primer, a black primer that is, a black gloss and then a metallic before I put on an aqua gloss, which is acrylic over the top. So having sprayed those three, I normally want to do them all in a day. So I will hair dry. There we go. Now I've got this is all clad chrome going on. It is my favourite chrome. I've put it on quite thickly here, but actually it only needs a light dusting to get a really nice chrome surface. And 90% of the work of your metallic is done with your black gloss. So whatever brand you're using, black gloss makes so much difference. But don't just limit yourself to black gloss. Red gloss can look amazing under gold. Brown gloss, I've got a brown primer. I sometimes just spray the brown primer and then a gloss varnish and then put the metallic on. You can get some really interesting colours with your metallics by base coating in a different colour because you don't put your metallics on that thickly. A lot of the black mirror comes through. Sorry, Adam just says, I haven't any need for a hairdryer. I've met Adam, he doesn't need a hairdryer, I'll vouch for that. But yeah, they're really useful. And just get a cheap one. This is a travel one, I think, the small one I've got there. I leave it up in my workroom. I do have a better one, obviously, for my own hair. It's not my normal hairdryer because it does get covered. Oh, I like that. Norm says, Marty from Matchbox Makeovers has a small temperature-controlled toaster oven he uses to accelerate drying. I don't think that a lot of my stuff would fit in there at the moment, but yes, I have a heated floor in my kitchen and putting stuff near, not on the heated floor, makes such a difference. And actually, another top tip, I have a heated floor. I don't want stuff going on there. I said I used card, but all of my buildings, when they were drying, are all sat on aerosol can caps. You know, I've used all these spray caps. I take a cap off, spray the can, and I keep the cap. And then all the buildings go on 3 or 4 of them. And if you don't do that, you've not sprayed underneath, but you've sprayed around the edges, they may stick to the cardboard, and then when you pull them off, you put a little bit of cardboard. It may pool a bit if you've been overzealous outside or something. But if you put them on spray can caps, I've got loads of brands, so they're all really wonky in different sizes. But if you put them on that, it takes them off the ground and just allows them not to stick to card that you've been putting them on. So Secret Anna uses a £10 travel hairdryer from Argos. I have no hair, but love it for paint drying. Yeah, it's great for brush painting as well. If you haven't got a hairdryer, you really should have one. Really, really should. Russ likes the temperature controlled toaster oven. I think toaster ovens are an American thing. I see them a lot on American makeovers, but I've never seen one in the UK really. Now I'm spraying this at the moment, which is Aquagloss, really badly. It's far too heavy. Do not spray it as heavy as that. But this is Aquagloss going on. And the reason I use Aquagloss is, we're on to airbrush cleaning. The reason I use Aquagloss is it is the best thing. It's Allclad's own brand, but it's the best thing over metallics not to dull the shine. It works really well. But the clue's in my name, Aqua. This is actually the only acrylic I ever spray. It's really quite fascinating how you can get by, and then every now and then you'll find one product where you go, no, I need to break all my rules. I don't need to thin it. Aquagloss sprays straight out of the bottle. All the Allclad spray straight out of the bottle. I never have to thin them. So I just put it in the airbrush, but I have 2 airbrushes. Now I said I have a spare one in case one clogs, and sometimes something will break, something will get dinted, or the washers will go and you replace them, but something isn't working. And what I found was, when I was moving from acrylics to lacquers, sometimes I was spraying acrylics and lacquers in the same day. So I might spray a Tamiya acrylic, and then for the colour, because I didn't have many lacquer colours, and then I'd spray my lacquer primers and things. And I was really worried about running something which had lacquer, which is really not great mixed with water, through something that also had water in it. So I actually have 2 airbrushes, but I do this full time for a job. I don't recommend it. And I use one for acrylics, it's my old one, and the button sticks. So when you take your hand off the air, because it's dual action, I didn't mention that actually, it's dual action, so you push down and pull back. I do recommend dual action for anything you want to control, because you can control not only the amount of air, but also the amount of spray. And you pull back for air, but mine just doesn't go back to the front particularly quickly, so the air carries on for quite a while. It can go for a minute or so. And I've tried cleaning it goodness knows how many times, and it still does it, so yeah. It's a bit better at the moment. It's sort of stopping to do it, but I've cleaned it so many times. So yes, dual action are definitely the better brushes if you can get one. Right, so we're on to airbrush cleaning. So I am going to show you airbrush cleaning as taught to me by the now sadly gone Mick Bonwick at Missenden Abbey. And the first thing to say is, if you're going to spray paint, you can get yourselves one of these little things, and it's got a little filter in there at the front away from the airbrush. There's 2 bits that stick out the top. One's got a filter and it lets fumes out. You're supposed to put a bit of water in it to capture the paint so it sits on the water, but I don't know if there's any water in mine. I think the top's glued on, so I just spray into it, and it corrals the spray from going everywhere as much. And I forgot to do it before I'd already done this. Now, 2 things to note. One, I'm not wearing gloves because this is an acrylic varnish that I'm cleaning off, and I probably wouldn't wear gloves for cleaning an acrylic. I will wear gloves for cleaning lacquer, because you have to put your fingers in the lacquer cleaner, and that stuff will probably give you cancer. So I do have gloves on. It will eat through your gloves if you put quite quickly, so you have to be quite careful. But I'm using this is Mr. Tool Cleaner by Mr. Colour, but it's Mr. Tool Cleaner. I'm using Mr. Tool Cleaner normally. This is Vallejo Airbrush Cleaner because it's an acrylic. And those are the 2 that I use. There are other brands, there are plenty of other airbrush cleaners. I just happen to have these ones on hand. And I've got other bottles I use up as I go. I always use the correct airbrush cleaner rather than using water. But at this stage, you could actually put some water down first to flush it through. For lacquers, you can't, so I just use the Mr. Tool Cleaner. I fill the cup, and this brush, I need to get it onto a different frame. Nope, let's keep going. Nope, there we go. Nope. Okay, that's as good as I'm going to get, I think. So this brush, all of the brush hairs are sort of splayed out. They are, it's really battered, so I can't scratch the inside of my airbrush with this brush. The first thing to say is nothing goes in your airbrush that can scratch it or leave detritus. And apparently cotton buds, which I used to use, can break off little bits which will then clog your airbrush later. So if you're having a lot of clogs and you use cotton buds, you can buy Tamiya cotton buds that apparently don't do that, but get yourself a long haired brush or something where the metal ferrule that holds the bristles of your brush won't touch your airbrush. And use this, I'm just using it to clean the paint off the outside. Now normally I'd also, it's varnish this one, so it's really hard to see. But normally I'd go in with a bit of, I'd get all the paint out and I'd use a bit of cleaner soaped kitchen roll to go round as well to remove the paint. And then I'd sprayed it all through, I'd put some fresh stuff in and then go around and just make sure I've got it nice and clean. Okay, you can, yeah, you can do the whole, make sure you do the outside as well as the inside. You want your airbrush to look spotless. Oh, here we go. So I've got some cleaner. This is Vallejo cleaner, as I said, but it's normally lacquer thinner. And I'm going around the outside to make sure that varnish is the worst. I hate varnish cleanup more than anything else. And actually, if there's one thing that makes me reach for a spray can over an airbrush, is the fact when I'm finished with the spray can, I turn it upside down and I put a squirt of the propellant out, generally with no paint to clear the nozzle. I turn it the right way up, I put it on the shelf, and it's done. Airbrush, no. So now I've got a goo container. This is that chocolate mousse you get from the supermarket in the UK. Don't know if you can get it in America. It's not ideal because there's a little ridge around the outside that actually makes it hard to get things out of. But what I do is I put a couple of pipettes of airbrush cleaner, or squirts if you're using one that has a squirty nozzle, in there, and I take apart my airbrush and I put the bits in there to soak. Now they're barely covered, to be honest. I'm a bit frugal with my cleaner because, you know, it costs money and I'm frugal. So I put that in there and I put them to soak. This is where you need the gloves. And that will do all of your main parts apart from the inner part on an Iwata. Now each airbrush is different, so you'll have to work it out for your airbrush. But if you're doing an Iwata, let me just pause that. That was a really crucial moment. Let's replay that. So this is the most crucial moment. When you are removing your needle, do not pull it backwards. Do not pull it backwards through your airbrush, getting any paint that's still on the tip into the inner workings of your trigger. I suspect that's why mine thicks. Pull it out the front and the paint that's on it is pulled forward. Do not pull it backwards. Okay, so I can't obviously get my needle into that container, so just a little bit more, fresh piece to put them on when they're clean, a little bit more of whatever thinner you're using, and clean that needle off. You want it to look spotless. You want it to be be careful with it. If you drop that, your airbrush probably won't work properly, you know. And then I use the same brush, you might get a better view of it, but my hand's generally in the way from this shot, to just clean these off. You can see it's a really bent, battered brush. And you want to just go through, take it off, make sure you're not scratching anything, get rid of the paint. And that will work for most of them, but the internal brass piece with the little nozzle tip on it, you won't get a brush into there. Now you can buy brushes that go in, but the only thing that will fit through the tip of that is a piece of sort of twisted wire, a really single piece of twisted wire. It's not very big. So what I do is the Mick Bonwick approved method. I put it on the end of a pipette and I put my pipette into the cleaner and suck it through. And then what you're doing is you're sucking back and forth with your pipette to suck even more of the cleaner through. Now, you will end up with cleaner inside it, and you can touch the tip to a piece of kitchen roll of this little brass piece, and it will pull out, kitchen roll will pull out the liquid, and you can look through it and see if it looks perfectly round. If it's perfectly round, then it's clean. you know, you've got all the paint out. Now for a lacquer, which is what I use, this will almost always clean it. But recently I'm finding my needles sticking a bit. So I've also started to just clean everywhere else inside. This is one of those brushes for your teeth that's supposed to go in between or something. I've no idea how to get that between your teeth. Mine feel far too tight for that. And again, it's got a metal centre, so you don't want to push it in too far, you don't want to scratch the back, but you just want to go and make sure that little bit there is nice and clean. You don't want to go in too far and scratch anything because that has got metal. I've got a blue one for my acrylic cleaning, I've got a red one for my lacquer cleaning. So I know that each one is only used. If I'm cleaning 2 things in a day, I know which one is which. And then I just reassemble carefully. Now, I find this leaves a little bit of the cleaner residue all through your airbrush, especially in the inner parts. So I recommend when you've put it all back together that you blast some air through just to make sure it's cleaned out. I once left my airbrush sat for years probably with, I think, probably some lacquer thinner in it, and the brass actually discoloured inside to a dark blue. So you do need to be careful. And you push your needle from the back, obviously, when you're putting it in this way. So just make sure you don't damage the tip when you push it in. And that's it, job done, cleaned. Now when I did acrylics, I was forever having to do ultrasonics and all sorts as well to keep it clean. But this method, since I learnt it with Mick, has kept them really spotlessly clean. It's been really good. And final top tip from cleaning, if you're doing smelly lacquer thinners and you want to put them in the bin, get a nappy bag or a dog poo bag. I don't know, polite way of saying that really, but a dog poo bag. And you just scrunch them up, put them in the bin, and then your fumes are all contained in that bag, and you can put it in your bin if it's an inside bin, and it won't keep leaking the fumes for weeks afterwards. There we go. That is how I clean my airbrush. Now, everybody has their own preferred methods, and you know, I haven't got any of the quick release clamps because I like to be able to get closer to the bottom of the table, and they're quite long. But, you know, this is my basic airbrush setup. Ooh, and that was me swapping over to my other. There we go. So that's my lacquer one back on. And I know which one is the lacquer one because it's the one where the trigger doesn't stick. And a reminder, because it's very important, goggles if you want, old glasses this is, and a mask. And then this is just another shot of my airbrush booth. Really wanted to show it off. I can dim these if I want. I don't know why I would, but I turn them off that way. They're on their own separate little thing. You can see how the paint's just pooling in the back there. It needs a change. This is my homemade one. It's got this airbrush filter at the front. That looks quite clean there because I've hardly sprayed anything. But at the moment that is bright white. And then I've got my homemade little sort of like chunking up to there to go out. And that is it. So, wow, let's see what people have had to say in chat. I'm sure everyone has their own way of doing things. So Bill says the drawback with using a hairdryer to accelerate drying is to introduce dust in the project. That is very true. Yeah, that is a problem. There's a few people commiserating with Adam for being follically challenged. Don't have a hairdryer, need something to keep the bald head shiny. A lot of guys use a dehydrator. I have no idea what you're talking about. Is that for paint or for your heads? Do you like dehydrate your heads? Okay. Okay, right. So, Bill Forrest, an infrared heater heats objects, not airspace, is the ideal drying and paint hardening accessory. Good to know, Bill. And if you have an infrared heater, then that sounds like a really cool idea. Russ says, I use plastic painting pyramids to set larger parts and flat points on. I didn't even know there were things called plastic painting pyramids. I've just used airbrush caps, so that's good. Tamsin says, useful tool for airbrush cleaning, the interdental brush. Is that what they're called? The tooth thing? Yes, that's what I used in the end on my one. But be careful because they have got a metal interior, so you don't want to scratch. Other people agreeing. That's a great tip. I'll give the interdental a try. If the tip is for cleaning the channel and down into where the trigger goes. Yeah, getting into where the trigger goes, if you've got paint back there because you pulled your needle out the wrong end, like mine is a nightmare to get to. Frugal is good. I agree. Monique says, exactly, Kathy, I don't have an airbrush and rattle cans do what I need and are easy to clean afterwards. Yeah, they are, aren't they? Or easy to clear. Norm, definitely don't bend your needle. Tamsin, very fine interdental brushes can be used for nozzle cleaning. I don't know they go fine enough. I've not investigated the interdental nozzle, but I do have an airbrush brush set, and they don't really go fine enough as a brush. It's only a wire that will go through mine. Russ says, I try to line up several projects for paint before I drag out the airbrush, such a pain to clean. You saw how long that took. It's not that long. And I find if I'm spraying lacquers, I can spray for hours without clogging. If I'm spraying acrylics, I spend a lot more time trying to clean it as I go because I end up with like clogged tips and stuff. So yeah, but it's the one thing that puts me off getting the airbrush out is, oh, I've got to clean it. And it doesn't take that long, but it's just that, oh, I've got to clean it. But it doesn't take that long. Frank's popping around to Stuart. Good to know. Macero, thank you for the needle cleaning and pulling out the front. This will change how I clean my airbrushes. I hope it helps. I didn't make this up. I was taught it by somebody. I think Mick would turn in his grave if he saw me using a metal interdental brush. But he basically says, but I got that one from NJM, not just Mecca, Marco Frizzoni. He used it in the front of his, so that's good. Bill, getting a good paint finish when spraying either aerosol gun or airbrush is 75% preparation, especially starting with a scrupulously clean gun and airbrush. Yeah, particle, gunk and contaminant-free, correctly thin paint. That's why I like mine stored in bottles. I do sometimes if I'm mixing a really small amount of a non-lacquer thinned paint, so it's not been pre-mixed. If I was doing an acrylic, I used to use the little metal dishes and mix just enough, and you know, pour it. But I'm just getting all these warnings from YouTube. It's not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. Okay, so sorry if you're having problems. Don't know why. But yeah, very bad. And then, you know, and that I think is one of the problems with if you don't shake your paint properly, or if you're using acrylics can get dried bits in. Lacquer tends to re-thin everything. And what I found is if I have a gunked up lacquer thinned airbrush paint, start that again. If I have a gunked up airbrush and I'm spraying lacquers, the lacquer thinner in the paint actually cleans the airbrush out over time. So yeah. Oh, and I've now got an excellent connection again. Brilliant. And so Stuart, yeah, I've cleaned up those wheels. I think Stuart and Frank know each other. I don't think this is anything to do with airbrushing. So I'm just going to let you talk about wheels. Or just throw them in your neighbour's bin. Norm, that's cheeky. I could just go and put mine outside because in the UK, all your wheelie bins are outside. I think almost everywhere now has wheelie bins. My dad doesn't, but almost everywhere else has wheelie bins. So I just go and throw them outside if I'm worried. But I don't put my bin out every week. And actually, I really worry that the bin men might open it up and huff it and go, whoa, this has got something chemical in here we shouldn't be putting in a normal bin. Right, so it's 65 out of 65, says Grandpa. Well, that's good. People are liking Norm's sneakiness. Oh, so Tamsin, you can get disposable ones, which are probably single-use plastics and going to be banned at some point. This, you're talking about interdental brushes, which have nylon cores instead of wire. That is cool. Follically challenged Adam has made his weekend. He's happy. So it's coming through fine, that's good. So Tamsin says, to prevent the needle sticking in the nozzle, put the needle back slightly when you're not using it. That's another good thing. I've got mine pushed in and I've noticed they sort of stick sometimes and you have to pull it back out. So, and Norm agrees, there's no problems. That's good. So Thorn says, my internet is on a timer, it's about to time out. I wish you all a great night. Well, thank you, Thorn. Nice to drop by. And yeah, see you next time. So we're quarter of an hour off the end, and I just wanted to go through some other tips for airbrushing and spray painting. So one of them is I spray painted outside. I spray painted all these 2.5 or 2 mil grills that I'd done for my lava before I knew what I was really doing, and I sprayed them black. And then I sprayed them with 2 or 3 browns and I left them on my patio to dry, and it was a hot sunny day, but the sun was going to be off them in a couple of hours, so they'd only get a couple of hours of sunshine. And it was about lunchtime. This is the UK though, it's not like we have baking sun. And I came back and they're FDM prints, and I've never had an FDM print warp drying on my patio before, but they'd warped, every single one of them. So I just throw that out there. If you're putting your FDM prints outside to dry, try and put them in the shade so that they don't sit in the sunshine and warp. There we go. Other top tips though, and actually Bill just mentioned this and this triggered this thought. What Adam Savage does when he's drying things is you do want to stop dust going on them. And I've seen Adam Savage do this a few times and I think it's really cute. He gets a cardboard box, puts it over whatever he's drying. So it's obviously going to be a big cardboard box. And before he does that, he cuts a hole in the side and he shoves his hairdryer through the hole into the box, turns his hairdryer on, which is sucking potentially dust through, but maybe not as much. And then just lets that heat up so it's more like an oven than a, sort of direct stream of hot air going past. And that's what he does. And it seems to work well. And that's what they did at ILM. So that's where he got it from. So that's Industrial Light and Magic who did Star Wars, for those of you who aren't into that. And he was a model maker for the movie industry, which is where he got a lot of this stuff from. All the shortcuts. And he does that and it works really well for drying. But if you're doing mirror finish glosses or metallics, much like when you're pouring resin water, it can be good to put a cover over them to stop dust settling on them. So Clay says, in absorbing all these tips might get me to try the airbrush more. Do you know, it's practice and it's a necessity. If you need to airbrush something, you will learn how to airbrush it and you'll need to get better. But I definitely have got better with just practice. I still don't love airbrushing, but I feel more confident. But I'm not an Angel Giraldez or Angel Giraldez, I guess. Kind of, I can spray paint dragon's wings and they look great. I'm not there, not at all. So what would you recommend? Would you recommend using regular painter's tape, masking tape, or tape specifically designed for masking parts of models before painting? I recommend using all of them. Let me just show you here. Whoops. Let me go to here. So it's here. It's here. It's in between these. Here we go. There we go. That one. Oh, let's just let it. There we go. So where you need a neat edge, a perfectly beautiful edge, a really nice edge, I always use Tamiya masking. And it comes in all sorts of widths. There are other brands that are now as good, but Tamiya was always the one I had, so I have quite a lot of them. You can get a curved one that's a bit more plasticky and thick, and you can get beautifully nice, you know, everything from a mil to like 10 mil or 20 mil or whatever in it. I would always use that for my neat edges. But I would then use masking painter's tape over the top, just normal, this is the frog tape here, because that's an expensive tape and the overspray from spraying this piece will go wider than one piece of Tamiya masking tape. So I've used a neat piece around the edge and then I've used normal masking tape glued onto that. If you're worried about it pulling paint off, you probably haven't let your paint set long enough. I always leave at least 24 hours before I mask everything, preferably a week if you're a weekend painter. Paint the week before you want to mask. But here I'm using frog tape delicate. You can put it on your jeans so it picks up a bit of fluff. Apparently you can do it on skin as well, but I'd rather put it on my jeans. So you put it on your jeans, it picks up just a bit of fluff and isn't as sticky then. And then you can use it round the Tamiya, and then I've got kitchen roll for the next section round just to fill these areas so they don't get any overspray. And I'm just spraying metallic on one piece here. So there we go. So there we go. Right, that's what I would do. But I would always use Tamiya for any edges that I want to be proper. Russ likes Adam's channel. I love Adam's channel. He made his own lightsaber, and now I want to make my own lightsaber. So Bill is asking Mike how small are finer the details, and that is actually another important question, because if I was doing for this helmet, which is as big as I go, I would use Tamiya, but for my terrain, there's going to be a lot of terrain, and I'm probably going to use this frog tape, which is a nice painter's tape. It's an inexpensive one, but I would use that on my, on the worktop or on my jeans, just to get some of the tack off, and I'll use that because there's going to be a lot to paint. Clay says he really likes Vallejo masking liquid to do precise areas. I've used it. Yeah, masking liquids are really good. In the middle of this ear, which you can't see because you're only getting a side view, there's a little, just one piece of LED lit. It's a little lozenge, and that's got the masking liquid in it because it's in a little hollow, so it'll be easy to get out. Stephen's gone off topic, and he said, has anyone ever used metal skin? It was a self-adhesive tin foil, dreadful stuff. I've bought some, but never used it. Richard says, thanks for doing this, Kathy. I don't know if it's my Insta question prompted this, but it's much appreciated. I think it may have been that gave me the idea, because I then did a video for my patrons based on it, and then thought, I may as well do this for the live stream. So yeah, I think it was you that made me do it. So thank you, Richard. McCary Siding, the dehydrators used to dry out food, but they're basically an oven. That means more power to operate. Yeah, it's also just another tool to keep. Hair dryers don't take a lot of room. A cardboard box you throw out at the end, but dehydrators and some of these other things, it's another tool. And if you're doing a lot of airbrushing and you need quick drying and you're worried about speeding it up, you just have to weigh out whether you're going to use it enough. Because I'm guilty of buying tools because I love them, and I've got tools I've never used. Hardly. I've got one of those really expensive foam cutting tables, which I did. It was invaluable for the one project I did use it for, and I'd always wanted one, but I then started doing 3D prints much more, and so I don't need to cut up foam. There we go. And Bill says we have big ovens for whole vehicles with panels, doors, wings. We use the infrared heaters. That's really cool. I've been around a shop for a few model railroad shops in America. I've been around them, and the stuff they have there for spraying is massive. This whole, carriages, it's massive. So Bill says, then after you sprayed lacquer over a whole roof, someone leaves a door open and the wind blows dust and midges all over it. Thankfully that's the roof, so nobody can see it up there. Oh, I suppose it's a car, maybe people can. Depends how big your vehicle is. But yeah. So, any other top tips people want to share that they've had over the years on cleaning with airbrushes? And a lot of it is experience. And I think now YouTube is here. People are getting more access to some of these esoteric tips. They're watching other people and seeing how they do it. And so airbrushing is perhaps not as scary. When I started, I was doing it from a book that said thin it to this, semi-skim milk. You've already heard my rant on semi-skim milk. And who knows whether semi-skim milk is the same in America as it is in this country? Who knows? I could never work that one out. And yeah, it's one of those things. Practice will make perfect. For me, thinning paints was the hardest part of getting airbrushing right. Control, I haven't really mentioned, if you want to do a big area, you pull back because you're airbrush, let me get this visually, that's your airbrush. It comes out in a sort of triangular stream. So the closer you are, the finer, the smaller the width of the line you put out. But you also need to put less paint out. So that's where the double action works. You push down for air and back for paint, or whatever it is. It's down for air, back for paint. And I was told for acrylics that if you do that in the wrong order, you're more likely to dry your tip. So if you so I would always push down to get some air going and then pull back to get some paint going. Then you let up the paint and let up the air. Now, I don't spray acrylics, but apparently if you do it in the wrong order, you're more likely to leave wet paint on your tip that is therefore more likely to dry out. Yeah. So Richard, I've seen a question there. Richard says when he was a kid he walked around the toy shop with wide eyes. Now it's the tool shop. Tools. And because they're for business, I've always got an excuse. Amazed taste. So an ultrasonic cleaner isn't necessary really. I used it a lot when I had acrylics because they gunked up a lot more, because the thinners aren't as strong against acrylics. Acrylics are a stronger paint against their solvents because they dry. If you think, if water is the solvent of the acrylic paint you have, when it's dry, water doesn't always get the acrylic paint off for a long time. It's very hard to get off. Whereas lacquers are so much easier because a lacquer will actually dissolve an old lacquer if you just put lacquer thinner through. So it's, I used my ultrasonic cleaner a lot when I sprayed acrylics. I didn't use it at all when I spray lacquers, in answer to that question. But if you clean it through regularly, which not everybody does, you should be able to avoid ultrasonics, but every now and then you find it just clogs up and it will need a little bit of a push in there. And I tend to use almost neat isopropyl alcohol in mine now. I take the rubber rings off and just shove it in there because I'm putting it in there because the normal solvents aren't getting it off and I don't want to use cellulose thinners. But yeah. So Richard's top tip, practice on something you don't care about. It is practice. Practice, practice, practice. Don't expect your first ever one to look good. So do practice, and practice on bits of paper. Just practice drawing with your airbrush on paper. Norm says there are many great airbrush tutorials all over YouTube. That is very true. There's some really, really gifted people out there who'll be more than happy to show off their airbrush tutorials. Clay would be, my top tip would be headphones, great music, and just zone out doing your paint thing, man. Hey, that is a good tip. I actually don't have a speaker in my paint room, so it's actually the one room without music in my house almost. So I do find it a bit annoying. But yeah. But also the fans, by the time I've got all these fans going, you wouldn't hear music very much over a speaker anyway. Paul says trigger brushes are much easier to control for beginners. Yeah, so these are ones that you pull like a gun trigger, you know, that sort of pull, as opposed to the push down and pull back that I've just been describing for dual action. They're only single action, but I get the feeling that they're much easier. Don't be afraid to buy more than one brush and try them out, or go on an airbrush to an airbrush shop or a course and try the different ones out. It used to be at Worley, Airbrush company was there, and they would have the different brushes that you could try out so that you would be able to try them out. And I can't repeat again the top tip of putting whatever your cleaner is through your brush before you start spraying your session, so that you know whether it's going to spray cleanly or not before you start with the paint. Timber, I can't use Xbox controllers. I don't have dexterity in my thumb, so I also don't like double action and prefer trigger brush. That makes a lot of sense, and that's good for people to know. Bill says the balance between air volume, air pressure and liquid volume affects the drying of the paint, as does the distance from the subject. That's very true. So it is 10 o'clock. Stephen's already got to go. He's bedtiming. And it's time for this live stream to end. So thank you to everybody. Thank you for all the people in chat. I hope you found that useful. I'm sure there's loads more tips we can do. I'm probably going to talk about brush painting next time, but it isn't actually my best subject. We'll talk a bit about the different paints and stuff like that. So definitely have a think about brush painting for next time. See you soon. Have a great month modelling. Have a great modelling month. Enjoy the rest of January and the start of Feb. See you on the second Sunday in February next. Bye. Oh, and thanks to the moderators again. Norm, Timber and Digger.